Hey guys, welcome back to Game On Outside Edition, Part 2. Today we're going to discuss ways that a GM can make the world that he's setting for his players feel more dynamic and lived in.
Yeah, for sure. As we've talked about lots of times, this is a sort of a cooperative experience, and what we want to do is make a game exciting for your players. That mostly falls on the GM's shoulders. The second word there is game master, so that implies you're in charge, and the responsibility is mostly on us as game masters to do that. So we want to go over a list of suggestions and tools that you can use to kind of liven things up.
Yes, the inspiration for this was I was playing a couple different video games, and I was asking myself, how come I would always either find one, the big bad evil guy in the same place every single time, just hiding in his cavern waiting for me,
Yeah.
or two, how come the NPCs are walking around in the same circle every single time, and how come I never see them somewhere else? And do I do that with my own NPCs in my own game?
Your blacksmith lives in his blacksmith's shop 24/7, 365. He never leaves. He
Yes.
sleeps on his anvil.
Yes, poor guy. So, we want to talk about ways that we can make it not your game not do that, because I'm sure I know I've made my games do that.
Look, you fall into routines just because they're easy, right?
Yeah.
They're convenient to do those things. They're logical. You put the shopkeeper in the shop. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
No, it does not. A good thing that I can think of is, first off, let's say that we wanted to talk about a shopkeeper. After hours, you're not going to find let's use the blacksmith again. You're not going to find the blacksmith pounding away on the anvil at 12 a.m. It's probably not good for his neighbors.
He's pounding away on mugs of ale in
the tavern. And that's
so.
where you should be able to find him. You want to be able to find NPCs in different places and not the same place every single time.
Also, you don't necessarily want to have to look for an NPC. Sometimes they can find you.
Oh, yes.
And this is where the GM, being a little bit more creative and a little bit more flexible, can vary things up. It's possible to write a story where somebody comes and finds the party, or better yet, comes and finds one or two members of the party. It doesn't even have to be the whole group of them, right?
I agree. And what you can do with that is sometimes that NPC could say, like, I know that this is your background, this is why I came to you. And tying back to our last episode.
Sure. Yeah, no, if there's something particular about a specific character that makes them the appropriate person to be approached, then by all means use that material as best you can. But even if it's random, you can still kind of change it up, especially if you're sensing that a particular character hasn't been super engaged in the storyline thus far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you can.
Doing that can be a great way to bring somebody who's kind of at the margins in this chapter back into the center of the action, is have the NPC, have the pivotal character with the piece of information or the object or the mission or whatever it is that you've got in your storyline, have them approach that person, and they become the conduit by which the party, moves the story forward.
Yes. So, in our very first episode, when we talked about making a module kind of your own.
Ah, yes.
We discussed the idea of taking settings and NPCs and plopping them in a different place. Now, you brought up a really good topic where you make really good NPCs. So what can we use for an NPC?
I like to tell everybody that I make really good NPCs, and maybe they'll believe me.
What can we do with NPCs to make the world feel a little bit more dynamic and less static?
Well, obviously, untethering them from a specific location, like we just talked about, that's key. Giving them a certain amount of agency,
Yep.
meaning that they can act according to their own motivations. They don't just have to be a letter drop box full of information that they read to you in a monotone voice and then promptly walk off the end of the stage, right? That's not something that you need to have happen. These can be living people.
So they can be proactive and not just reactive?
Well, absolutely they should be proactive. They also should be complex.
Yes.
They should have a variety of motives. They
Okay.
shouldn't just be one type of person,
Yes.
right? They don't have to be good guys. They don't have to be bad guys. They are something of both.
Yeah.
So I think that's really a good way to give them life, give them a vitality, which makes the world feel more vital. Because mostly people remember encounters with individuals. So make those individuals interesting. Also, don't use them. They're not one-shots,
Yes.
right? You don't have to use them for one piece of information or a key thing in the adventure and then throw them away. They can be recurring characters as long as you don't kill them off, and again, if you don't have them tethered to a certain geography,
Yep.
they can come back around, and your characters will establish relationships with NPCs, which then makes them care about them more, and that again draws players into a game.
Yes, and not every encounter, and I like that we're using the word encounter, not fighting, because every encounter does not have to be fighting.
Yes.
So there are different ways to come upon problems or come upon events that isn't just fighting to the death. I like you made a really great example when you were talking about this about what if you find two NPCs in a road kind of quarreling or something, like something's going on in their life. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to derail your quest to go help them.
Well,
It could be fun.
well, right, but there's a great way to show that characters are individuals with their own motivations, right? They are having some sort of an interaction between them that you, your party, is an observer of. And you can choose to take a side, you can choose to intervene, you can choose just to watch to see how it all shakes out. But here you have two potential characters that you can interact with, one or both, and you already have some context about who they are or what they're about, and you, as players, get to choose how to proceed in that situation. And they seem like real people if they
Yes.
have real things going on in their lives.
Yeah, definitely. And again, not everybody, just like our real world, not everybody is pure good and everyone is pure evil. And you don't have to go around murdering everybody.
Well, yes, as players, murder hobos, you don't need to be that way. But also, that kind of brings up a segue into something else. What we're talking about with NPCs is absolutely true for villains and antagonists, too.
Yes.
Like, having complex villains is more interesting than having cookie-cutter,
Pure
bullseyes
capital E
that
evil.
you shoot holes into.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, what if your big bad isn't entirely bad?
Yeah. Yeah. What if he has motives that are somewhat sympathetic?
Or he's in conflict with another big bad, and you're put in the position of saying, well, you know what, if I oppose this guy, this other guy gets stronger, and I'm not sure that letting that other bad guy get stronger is necessarily the good thing. I mean, that happens in the real world all the time. Just turn on the news and you see people making decisions about,
Yeah.
things that are happening in the world. So now, not to inject too much reality into a fantasy-based RPG, but the fact is, having moral ambiguity and having to make choices and then live with the consequences of those choices,
Yes.
can really enrich in the experience and make it feel more real and feel more interesting, and ultimately, your players will be more invested. They'll
Yes.
care more.
And we want those consequences to last. And it's I'm I have this problem where, like, I'll instill some sort of consequence, but then it just kind of goes away the next session.
Yeah.
But if it's something that is, maybe not world-shaking, but region-shaking, it should at least come up again.
Right.
If it naturally and organically can come up again.
Or it comes back around anyway. It may be cyclical, right? It shows up every once in a while, just like a recurring NPC can, right? A recurring plot point that is born of actions that your players took earlier on in the campaign that swings back around. It's like a stand-up comedian doing a callback to an earlier joke, right? That's funnier when they do that. Well, it's more interesting when we do that in a storyline too. So think about that.
Yeah.
Give the opportunity for these plot points to come back around, especially the ones that were determined by your players, because they're inherently going to care more about the storylines that they help create.
Yes.
Let's about the villains thing. I'm a big fan of making bad guys human too.
Yep.
Just not blank slate, cliche tropes, but actual entities with motivations. And it's not just take over the world and kill everybody. That's not the kind of motivation I mean. They have a history too. They have a backstory too. How did the bad guy get to be bad? Was he born that way? Probably not. He got that way somehow. And not that you can redeem him necessarily. Not that you have to say, oh, well, we're not going to kill the big bad guy. If that's what the plot requires, then you do it. But don't make it just automatic. Don't have your party walk in and go, oh, well, I can tell by the way he's dressed that he's the bad guy, and so let's just hit him with swords until he dies.
Yeah. But also another thing about the bad guy is also make him more of a presence to your world. It all ties back to, I don't want to find him in his little cave at the end of the dungeon. I want him out and in the world. If he's so bad, how come he's hiding?
Yeah.
How come he's not out there disguised as someone?
Yeah, no, we talked about this one. This is so good. Nothing makes your players more linked into your plot line than paranoia. So one of the best ways to do that with a bad guy is make him able to be disguised as somebody else.
Yes.
Make him not immediately recognizable as the bad guy. Because then, and better yet, don't let your players know that he's able to be disguised until a little later in the storyline.
Oh, yeah.
And then they will second guess every encounter they have ever had up until that point. What about that shopkeeper? What about that blacksmith? Was he the big bad guy and we didn't even know? Yeah, look, that stuff is great.
We got that magic item from that one guy.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Did he sabotage us? Is this a Trojan horse? We're all doomed now because we took the... That kind of stuff is great, and it'll get your players investigating and suspecting and looking twice at every little thing that happens from the plot point at that plot point forward, as they try and figure out how are they going to be able to recognize the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that allows him to move around, which gets back to your original inspiration, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to encounter the boss in the same spot every time. Well, if this guy can move and he looks like anybody, your campaign has all the fetters and limits of traditional cliche bad guys are off the table, and you can do whatever you want.
Exactly.
And have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly touch on one other way that we can kind of make the world feel more dynamic is that regional effects. I'm going to use famine as an example.
Okay.
What if you come into a region and there's a famine going on and there's death and destruction? Has nothing really to do with the quest, but it's I mean, it happens in the real world. The
world marches on, yeah. For sure. This actually is a great one. Current events. I mean, we're right now as we're filming this, we've got this whole coronavirus thing that's developing, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff happens in the world. It happens in the gaming worlds too.
Yep.
Famine is fine example, or a plague, or an earthquake,
Yep.
or whatever it is. You know, it can be a natural occurrence. It can be a regional or even global happening that's
Exactly.
going on. Something. Hey, if you're having that pirate adventure, there's a storm on the high seas, or whatever it is. So you can throw these kinds of things into the mix that are add texture, add an element of danger,
Yep.
can cause a time limit on other actions that are going on in your
Exactly.
plot line, which adds additional drama by putting a time clock on things. So don't be afraid to just pull from the real world, or pull from things that aren't central to your plot. Like, an earthquake isn't necessarily caused by the big bad guy. Sometimes it just happens. But it still makes action
Yeah.
for your players, whether or not it's, you know, directed or there's motivation. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that stuff is awesome. That works great.
Yeah, and I think we gave a good amount of ideas and tips for the GMs out there.
Oh yeah,
how
I
they
mean,
can
we
make
could
it
go
less.
on this one forever, but we shouldn't. So
Yes. Again, just really quickly, if you do want to learn about how you can take a module and kind of tailor it to your own world, or make it something a little bit different from the book itself, go watch our first video. We have a nice lengthy conversation on that.
yes, very lengthy, because back then we didn't know how to stop talking.
Yes.
But look, the jokes aside, there's a lot you can do with that. We talk about some of it there in some different depth, if not more depth. And we could do this topic again.
Yes, we can
with
definitely bring more in.
But yeah, no, this gives you a good place to start.
Yeah.
And so hopefully it's useful to you guys. If you have other things that you want us to talk about, send suggestions to us, questions.
Please do. We always welcome our subscribers and our Twitter followers and our Facebook followers. Our last episode was a suggestion, so
Yeah.
thank you guys, and let's try to make our worlds a little bit more living.
Yeah, more interesting. And until next time,
Let's game on.
game on.